Yes.
Okay. Okay. So your motion for today would be the narrative of individual environmental responsibility, correct?
Yes.
Right. So shall we start with the government first speaker?
Okay.
Timekeeper, you okay? Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so good morning, everyone, members of the floor. So today we will be debating on the motion that this House regrets the narrative of individual environmental responsibility. So today, as the Prime Minister, I will be doing three things in my speech today. Firstly, I will be defining a few words in this motion that requires clarification. Secondly, I will be giving out the burdens of proof on our side, and thirdly, I will also be giving one argument on our side. Okay, so but before going further, we first have to understand this motion. Okay, so in this motion, the most important word we need to understand here is what is individual environmental responsibility. So basically, individual environmental responsibility is the belief that individuals are responsible for, for keeping the environment safe, or they should be held responsible for in all the environmental issues. Okay. So what's the problem with this belief of individuals should be held accountable? Okay, we think that there are two problems here. We think that firstly, it is ineffective, and secondly, it is not feasible. Okay, so following on that, we think our burden of proof that we want to prove here today is basically we are going to prove why individual environmental responsibility is ineffective, and secondly, we want to prove why individual environmental responsibility is actually not feasible. So we want to push burdens on the opposition side. They have to prove why individual environmental responsibility will actually give a huge impact in combating environmental issues, and secondly, they have to prove how individual environmental responsibility is actually feasible. Okay, so uh, okay, moving on to the first thing. Basically, uh, as I said before, individual environmental responsibility is actually very ineffective. Okay, why is this true? It is true because uh, we have to we have to think in the bigger picture here. In the bigger picture, in this world, we think that individuals do not hold as much power in saving the environment as opposed to other stakeholders here, such as the big corporations and such. We think that uh, the individuals, we think that the power that these big corporations, who are the main stakeholders here in in today's debate, has more power over over individuals have in combating these environmental issues. Okay, so firstly, uh, let's say uh, even if okay we implement when we follow the narrative of individual environmental responsibility, even if it does happen, we think that the benefits that it causes, the benefit that it yields us, is very small, and not marginal at all, very small. Because why is this true is because we think that there are lots of other factors, lots of other stakeholders, lots of other people who actually cause this problem in the first place, more than the individual itself, and they are the ones we should be trying to fix in order to get a better environmental responsibility. Because in the end of the day, we have to realize that our objective is to provide a better environmental state. Okay, so okay, so as I said, there are other stakeholders that give bigger factors here, is because because one of them is a big corporation. Okay, so to illustrate what I'm saying is basically, okay, let me give you an example. Let's say there are lots of littering. Let's say in one side, we have lots of litter being thrown into the river, lots of trash being thrown into the river. But on the other hand, we have lots of we have lots of people littering. But on the other hand, you just have one corporation or factory throwing out their waste in this river. We think that in this case, the waste given by this factory or corporation is much bigger and much more uh, much more heavier the effects than people littering. We think that this is the case. Hence, in this example, we think that the big corporations is something we should compare first, because when we compare, it is very incomparable, because we have to say that individuals impact is actually very small. Okay. Next is basically uh, another example I can give you here is basically in the case of the ocean here itself. So in the ocean, what individual environmental responsibility pushes us to do is basically to ban the use of straws. Okay, but we think that in this case, uh, what's the bigger factor here in the pollution of the sea here is, one is that there's lots of fishing nets and whatnot. The fishing nets is actually what's killing all the life in the sea. And secondly, like oil spills will actually cause more death than actually just this plastic straws. So we think that in this case, that is clear proof why we should focus on these big corporations instead of individual environmental responsibility. Okay, so we think that here we should use uh, we should use in this case we should use cumulative responsibility, which means we should be holding uh, not individuals responsible, but we should be holding these bigger corporations, these the real factors, the real people who perpetuate the destruction of the environment. They should be the ones who should be responsible for this issue. Okay, let me give you another example to very clearly illustrate. Okay, so let's say in this village, for example, there are lots of open burning that are carried out. Okay, but then we compare it to to a factory or a big corporation here, which also uses open burning when creating their own products. Okay, so we think that in this case, the carbon emissions from the open burning and the carbon emissions from the factory itself, we think that the carbon emissions from the factory is going to be very big factor, much bigger than what burning by individuals in the village can do. So hence we think that individual environmental responsibility is we regret it, because we think that we should be focusing on on the related perpetuators instead of just individuals who do not hold such a big role in trying to fix environment. And with that, I've never been part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Government Speaker One. Okay, can we have the opposition? Leader of the opposition?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Timekeeper? She's ready.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, Industrial Revolution 4.0 and moving on to Industrial Revolution 5.0 is a real thing. The technology is spreading and people are living better lives overall. But what does this come at? What price does it cost? We tell you it costs environmental things like climate change and stuff like so, right? But this debate isn't about whether or not corporations have value towards contributing to environmental pollution, but this debate is about whether or not an individual has value in catering towards each of their own environmental responsibility. As the leader of opposition, I will do a couple of things, right? I will start off with what we disagree from what the Prime Minister has said and what the Prime Minister has not mentioned in this debate, and why we think those factors or those aspects are important to be addressed. And I will move on to say what is this current status quo on our side, and in an important highlight I would later on speak about in my speech, and what do we mean by individual responsibility, by individual environmental responsibility, what problems does it solve, and how would an individual cater towards that environmental responsibility, which the Prime Minister has not mentioned at all. I will also end my speech with a comparison on what happens specifically on our side, where individual responsibility is upholded and promoted even, and what happens if not, and overall why we believe that the side on opposition would win this case, right? So let's start off with what we disagree. So the Prime Minister said that you have to look at the bigger picture, that major corporations, mass production contributes to environmental pollution more, right? Yes, we agree. We're not saying that we disagree, but we believe that individual responsibility does have value. However small it is, however insignificant you think it is, individual responsibility has a value in catering towards environmental pollution. Why? I will tell you later in my speech. The moving on with this, the current status quo. So a lot of people are disregarding and being ignorant towards individual responsibility. Like the Prime Minister has said, he talked about how major corporations are contributing to environmental pollution. Yes, that mindset is what making the society regressing and not progressing towards an environmental stability. That is what is contributing to our society's downfall, because that mindset thinks that, oh, the responsibility should be held over to environment, over to major corporations, and instead of myself. They don't care that they're throwing a trash can out of their car on a drive, right? They don't care about that because they think, oh, it's just one trash can. That's one individual. What about many people? What about a society? If a whole society throws trash cans out of the car, what happens then? That's only one example I'm giving you. That is why we are debating today's motion, right? So we believe that individual responsibility holds value and does affect corporations. How is this? Why do major corporations exist? Because of individuals, because of consumers, because of the society that contribute to that major corporation. Without individuals consuming their products, those major corporations would not exist. So in hindsight, when those major corporation does not exist, it would furthermore, on our side, it would furthermore contribute to environmental stability, because those individuals that support that major corporation already know their individual environmental responsibility. So they know it, so that will in turn have a direct link towards major corporations, right? Which will be further elaborated by my second speaker. What do you mean by individual environmental responsibility? It is you. It is me going out and making sure my house is turned off all the lights. It's me making sure that my shower tap is off. It's an individual thing where you have the conscious and right mind to think about your actions. That's what responsibility means. You are given a responsibility. You have mental capability and a good conscience to think about how you can carry out the individual responsibility by thinking about the impacts and your conscious mind, and what problems it solves, or what problems does it generate. All those things are linked to responsibility. A few solutions to environmental stability would be carpooling. You go into the car with your other friends to go to work instead of having single cars. That reduces carbon monoxide in the air. Recycling, throwing cash in proper bins, not throwing it out of the car. We are not Individual responsibility isn't just about having awareness. It's not just about watching TV and saying, oh, yeah, environments should be, it's an important thing. No, it's not about that. It's about you taking action. That is responsibility. Yes, we agree that other person needs to turn on their lights, needs to take a shower, needs to attend online class. But we are promoting the narrative that each individual should be able to know what the actions cause and what they are bringing to this table, right? So I'll also talk about what happens on our side when an individual environmental responsibility is upheld, right? So what happens is, the structure of it is, first, an individual has awareness. What happens when the individual has awareness that they should have responsibility? They will spread it to other people, not to people around them, their child, their parent, everybody. They pass it on to other people, and when that mentality is passed on to other people, it would create a society that is more aware about environments and their responsibility, and much cater towards having responsibility, right? So when they pass it on to other people, let me tell you something: human beings have a tendency to follow the majority. It means that they have a tendency to jump on the bandwagon and follow whatever other people are doing. Because of this, when they see other people having this responsibility and not having having this responsibility and not just ignoring. That ignored mentality is what is happening on the government side. That ignorant mentality is what is regressing our society today. So, and this will eventually affect society and big companies. Why? I've told you before, because humans are consumers. They contribute to major corporations. They are the sole being as to why major corporations happen. Without these consumers, major corporations don't happen. When major corporations don't happen, environmental stability is promoted. What happens when uh, on on another case, or on government side, what happens that they are promoting performative activism by having major corporations. Why? Because they don't actually care about the environment, but they will do campaigns and promotion tactics to for them promote the campaign, but they don't actually care about environmental, right? So, and there's no accountability. We don't want a world where, regardless of individuals or major corporations, they do not have accountability for their actions. And this is why on our side, we should win. Thank you.
Thank you for speaker from the opposition. Okay. So, can we have the second speaker, government?
Am I audible?
You are. May I know your name, please?
Nabil.
Nabil. All right. All right. You may start when you're ready.
Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right. Good afternoon, a bit to all the members of the hall. Today, I'm going to be doing two things. Number one, I'll be rebutting all the basic arguments given by the leader of opposition. And then secondly, I will give out the second argument from the government side to extend our case and to reveal what is our true angle for this debate. So without further ado, let's move on with the rebuttals. So for my rebuttals, I believe that the opposition leader speech can be summarized into two main issues. Number one, does IER really have value? And number two, do individual responsibilities not matter at all? So let's dissect this one by one. So the first issue of whether IER really has value or not. So they argued about how IER actually has a benefit because it gives the awareness and gives the consciousness to individuals to not litter, to not contaminate the environment. And also this can somehow relate to big corporations because once the individuals have the mindset of this good mindset will also integrated to the big corporations as well. So my rebuttal for this is pretty simple. For the big corporations one and how they can also be integrated to have good consciousness as well is simply not true because we need to really focus on the difference of stakeholders. Individuals and big corporations and governments are very different. To understand that a certain individual can have consciousness about the environment is different from trying to say that the big corporations can have a consciousness for environment because individuals, they don't have anything to focus on when they want to carry out their daily lives. But for big corporations, they are profit oriented. They want to get as much profit from their company as much as possible. Therefore, environment should be something that is the last thing they would think of. So it's very difficult to actually say that the big corporations will also change as well. Also on the narrative of how IER has value or not, we on the government side actually do believe that IER, the individual responsibility is important, but we believe that it shouldn't have become a narrative in the first place. So even if the IER does have value, I think that the amount of impact and the amount of things that you can get from it is marginally smaller to the huge problem that we are dealing with in the status quo. Because we already told you how IER isn't really as efficient enough to have a huge impact on the environment. So moving on to the next issue is about, do individual responsibilities matter at all? So now, to make it clear, the government actually do agree that individual responsibility is important. But what we believe isn't it that it doesn't deserve to be a narrative on its own, and it shouldn't be something to focus on. And also, the opposition side also stated that we think that the individual responsibility is not important at all. This is simply not true, because my prime minister stated that it is not. We didn't say that it's not important. We said that it is not significant enough to become a narrative to focus on. So therefore, this is why we regret it. Because once we focus on something that only gives a small impact to the huge problem, it is not only time wasting, it is not only difficult and not feasible, but it is also something that is wasteful, because we could have focused on much more important things. And that's why we believe that having IER as a narrative should be something to be regretful of, because it doesn't deserve to be its own narrative. So that is all for my rebuttals. Before I move on to my arguments, are there any POI from the opposition side? All right, I think yes and no. So moving on to the argument for my speech. So, ladies and gentlemen, my Prime Minister talked about how IER is ineffective. So to extend and explain this further on, my argument will be about how IER is actually not feasible. So this is taking into account of the possibility of having IER to be an effective way of trying to solve problem solution. But let me explain to you that it is actually not feasible, even if it is effective. So I have three analyses for this. Number one, IER is difficult to reach its end goal. So let's say we know that the end goal for IER is basically to have consciousness and to have all individuals be responsible so that climate change can be combated. But the thing is, there is not many things that individuals themselves can actually do to reach this end goal. Let me give you an example. So obviously, one of the biggest impacts of climate change from individuals are from cars. Obviously, you would need to not drive cars, or maybe have an electric car, or maybe take public transport. It is something that could actually impact the environment if all individuals were to do so. But in reality, in the real world, we cannot expect all individuals to own an electric car. We cannot expect all individuals to have the ability to take public transport, because public transport is not provided to every places on earth. Therefore, we believe that it is not easy for the individuals to do anything for themselves other than trying to not litter, because we feel like littering is such a small thing and we should focus on something much bigger, for example, the emissions from cars and everything. And also, it is also not easy for the government to control these individuals. There's movements such as the straw movements or the plastic movements, basically not using straws or plastics. It is also something that is very ineffective, and it is something that's very difficult to have all individuals follow, because it's just a movement, because not everyone is actually going to follow it. We could argue that people will get motivated to care about the environment, but I don't feel like it's going to actually integrated to everyone's mind. I don't think everyone will actually follow this straw movement, and it's actually backed up by many evidences already, because we can already see that people still use straws, people still use plastics, and that's why we can still see all of those trash on the sea and in the sea and everything. So my second analysis is that big corporation and government are easier to control and regulate. So this is something that is very simple to explain. Basically, like I said, the big corporations are very profit oriented and they want to get as much money as possible in their company. But this is the mindset that is very harmful to the environment. This is something that we should actually focus on. This is something that we should have a narrative upon, because when you have a big corporation that really likes to release a lot of emissions and pollutions, we need to change their mindset, change their way of trying to release all of those emissions. That way, the government and the big corporations can find a solution onto how to actually stop their emissions. And even though it's something difficult to do and something that is not probably going to happen in the future, but this road of efforts will actually give a big impact. It will actually guarantee a good impact to the environment compared to trying to focus on the narrative of IER. So how is big corporations and government responsibilities more feasible than IER? Basically, I've explained to you how it's easier for the government and big corporation to focus on their own issues than to have all individuals to help themselves to combat climate change. So why is this argument important? Firstly, it proves that IER is not a narrative that is easily accomplished. And secondly, since it's not easy to accomplish, it's better to focus on other narratives other than IER themselves. So that's why this gives more reason for the government to regret the narrative. Therefore, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker two. All right. So can we have the second speaker from the opposition?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Loud.
So I'll begin my speech in three, two, one. So first and foremost, I would like to open my speech with a movement that Biden is trying to achieve. Joe Biden from the USA, that he's trying to achieve zero carbon emissions by the year of 2030. So according to the site government on their world, they believe that installing filtration systems to all of these factories to make sure that all of their waste is filtered, by this we can help Biden achieve his zero carbon emissions by 2030. But what about the factors such as the people driving around using the petrol and their cars, and about them dumping their domestic waste and whatnot, which causes to carbon emission? Are you telling me that all of these things, that millions and almost billions of people around the world doing all of these things, will not contribute at all to any of the pollution? The burden of proof that we are trying to imply in this debate is to show whether or not we should put pressure in individual responsibility towards the environment, which is what side opposition is trying to do. We are trying to show you the burden, saying that it is significantly important as to how we should put pressure on it. So, for example, Singapore is such a clean nation. Everybody knows that. Do you think that the people had nothing to do with it? That they had. What about the no littering law that they had, where they have heavy fines implied on them? And what about the days where they, in Singapore, you don't drive using your car every day. You have a certain license plate that allows you to drive on alternate days and whatnot. This is to reduce the amount of times you bring your car out and cause carbon emission due to the combustion of your fossil fuels. And they made their public transport so efficient that encourages people to, instead of buying new vehicles, they can even use their public transport because it is that efficient to reach where they want to go and when they need to be there. And moving on, the residential areas that we have on planet Earth, when it comes to condominiums, apartments, terrace houses, bungalows, mansions, and all that, the electricity consumption or anything that they use, or wastage of water, or non eco friendly electrical appliances, and using natural gases as a source of fuel to cook their foods, because not everyone can afford an electrical cooker, all of these things contribute to the heavily and damaged environmental situation that we are facing right now. It's not only the companies production. Just because something is very visible, it does not mean that they're the sole contributor to something. Just because it is not as visible as you see in the people and the citizens of what they're doing, but collectively it plays such an important role. Just because you're going to disregard the right of an individual, it does not mean that you're going to solve a collective manner. And moving on, for giving you another examples, landfills. When the government doesn't care about putting up more bins and implying laws to separation of waste, and everything just goes straight to domestic waste. For example, in India, everything is just dumped into an area of land full of trash, and this area is dedicated of getting rid of waste, solely on getting rid of waste. And there are some waste that can be degraded, some waste that cannot be degraded, and this ends up making the land not suitable for agriculture at all, and it causes a rise in disease because of bacterial growth, and and that land could have potentially been used for something else, for development, for anything else. But because of its failure to recycle and the failure for you to put emphasis on the individual's responsibilities, you have caused such a mass effect that cannot be disregarded just like that, because you see a more visible and a more um, easier way. And you are implying, as long as it is a minority issue to your case, it is fine to push it away. It is very clear to see the priorities of the world that government has built as to the minorities do not matter as long as they manage to just get rid of the major things. And moving on, um, when we speak about these corporations and these factories, they are being built solely by billionaires or millionaires. These billionaires or millionaires are the individuals who are responsible for the actions of them building their companies and factories without a proper filtration waste, as a recycling system. So at the end of the day, you can blame it on the company, but you have to look at the main root of the cause as to why the company even have this system in the first place is because of the individual responsibility towards the co-founder or the founder of the company. When you don't raise this kind of conscious of the responsibility needed in an individual, they end up making decisions like this, which causes such adverse effects in the long run. And then I also believe in consumerism power. These companies, like my leader of opposition I mentioned, these companies won't be up and running successfully, opening up new branches and causing more damage to the environment if the people are not supporting it. The people in the world have not really um, have not really focused on thrifting, recycling clothing. They have mainly just focused on buying more clothes whenever they want, which causes more cotton to be produced. And when you produce more cotton, tens of thousands of liters of water, electrical consumption, carbon emission, all of this causes because of the people's choice of supporting these companies who are not eco-friendly and whatnot. According to side government, they seem to blame everyone, every big corporation, but themselves as the individuals. Yes, you can say Russia and Ukraine. They are making Russia and other countries. They're making atomic bombs. They are causing the environmental damage when they do all of these things. But just because of the microscopic causes, um, like plastic use and clothes that are not being recycled, that doesn't cancel out the fact that they are both responsible on both ends. If there is pollution by these corporations that are not addressed, the people play an important role in addressing by doing movements, by doing strikes and whatnot. It is a beginning of something, but it's not progressing according to the world of government because nobody is putting pressure on it. Because according to government side, they rather put pressure on big corporations than individuals. So, what fruitful outcome are you supposed to see if you yourself are not trying to implement some kind of change in individual responsibility towards environment? So with that, I rest my case.
Third speaker, government. Are you ready?
Can do better.
Greetings and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. To all members of the floor, today I would like to tell you on the notion that this House regards the narrative of individual environmental responsibility that side government strongly regards this narrative. We have shown to you, we have, okay, as side government today, my structure of the speech will be like this. First, I will provide clarification. Second, I will provide clashes integrated with rebuttals coming from our side towards side opposition. Thirdly, I will provide some fair comparison as a conclusion to today's debate. So first of all, we have already told you ever since the first speaker inside government how IER is ineffective in the first place. We do not totally disregard the role that IER or individual environmental responsibility plays in reducing the environmental issues in today's debate. We just say that we wanted to shift the focus to more to the other stakeholders that actually contribute more or major is the major contributor to environmental issues in today's debate. And we have already told you already. We have already pushed our burdens on why IER or in individual environmental responsibility is not feasible in today's debate. So first of all, my first speaker has already told you why it's ineffective is because we have to look at the bigger picture. The accumulative effects of individual environmental responsibilities of these individuals not taking into or not being aware or ignorant towards environmental issues is marginally small compared to like what we have been pushing around big corporations. And then side government has been coming up with narrative saying that, oh, we need to enforce this awareness towards individuals, because indirectly when we enforce this narrative of individual environmental responsibility, we will also indirectly affect big corporations to actually shift their mindset from being what do you call it, profit oriented, to actually being more aware of the environmental conditions. However, we say that that is not true, because these big corporations, how do you incentivize? How, when by changing a society's mindset, individuals' mindset, lead can actually motivate big corporations who are already initially profit oriented to actually shift their mindset to being more environmental friendly in the first place, because their whole central business, their whole central revenue is based on this on the production of the mass production of products in the first place, which contribute to all these environmental issues as per se. So our site has already told you, even if big corporations uh, have what do you call it, are slightly influenced by this enforcement of individual responsibility, but we do not expect a drastic change, because at the end of the day, business is a business and it's still going. The end goal is to actually reel in revenue. So my second speaker has already told you how we view IER, or individual environmental responsibility, has value. However, it is not insignificant. I mean, it's insignificant. We didn't say that it's not important, but it's quite insignificant compared to what we are pushing. Okay, so it's quite a simple debate today. Side opposition should have told us how IER will give a huger or larger impact towards the improvement of environmental issues. And they have been throwing around examples, very minute examples about, for example, rice cookers, like how not everyone can afford rice, we call electrical cookers, and they're going to use fossil fuels to actually cook stuff, and this will contribute to carbon emission and so on and so forth. We say that this is some, yes, we concede to the fact that not all people actually have the means to have this, but then in comparison, if we have to accumulate all these what we call individuals compared to larger populations that actually release waste in bulk, it's quite a big difference in the emission of waste, which will affect the environment. So moving on to my clashes. So the first clash in today's debate would be which side caters to the improvement of environmental issues. We say that on site government, we actually cater to the improvement of environmental issues better than site opposition, because on site opposition they are focusing on these minute things which already happens in status quo. And we see on site government, we have already proved to you how status quo is ineffective or less efficient in what you call it, in solving these problems in the first place. We have already told you that we need to shift the focus from these things to actually move forward in solving the problem in today's debate. So a fair comparison on our side would be government's worst case scenario versus opposition's best case scenario. On side government, we actually have a major step towards fixing and solving the main issue in today's debate, which is reducing environmental issues, because we are targeting big major contributors towards the contributor to environmental harms and damages and pollutions, whatnot. Whereas on site opposition, they are solely focusing on individual environmental responsibilities, or just focus on the impacts, the small impacts that it brings. So we say that in today's debate, we our side has actually won today's debate, and we say that we have never been prouder to propose today's motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, third speaker. Right, so can we have the opposition third speaker?
Uh, can you hear me?
Out and clear.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am the third speaker of side opposition, and I will fulfill two tasks, which is number one, to provide my rebuttals against government side, and to show you that what side opposition has created the world that side opposition created is related to the current status quo. Okay, let me start by saying what government thinks. Government is creating illusion that when we say individual environmental responsibility, individual meaning only one person, that they are creating an illusion that only one person exists in this world. We as side opposition saying, which is much logical, that multiple individuals contribute to a society, a large group, and that they are as equally as important as the big corporations that they keep mentioning. So, going on to my first rebuttal, they say, look at the bigger picture. Let us look at the big corporations. You just said looking at the big corporations, but you're not achieving our goal today. Our goal today is to encounter environmental problems. You did not tell us what are these big corporations supposed to do. So let me state the obvious things that the government will do towards the big corporation. Number one, they will impose fines. You obviously impose fines to those big corporations that release their chemical waste into rivers, like what you mentioned earlier. Okay, and then let me look at a bigger picture. You said to look at a bigger picture. Now let me look at a bigger picture of the examples that you gave. You gave that, let's say for example, one a village conducts open burning. It's not as equal as to the amount of carbon emission as a uh, factory releases when they do open burning. Now, okay, let us take that example of one village. Let's say one state has 14 villages. Now, 14 villages, now there's 14 states in Malaysia. Let's take Malaysia as an example. Now, 14 villages times 14 states in the Malaysia. Now all of them conduct open burning. Won't the carbon emission be equal to the amount of carbon emission being released by factories? Now, same as another example that you have given, throwing rubbish into oceans. You say that when a person throw rubbish into oceans, let's say, for example, if you throw rubbish into the sea, um, it is not equivalent as a company throwing their oil spills into the sea. So now let us look at a bigger picture, and let us see how many more um, oceans we are polluting when multiple people do this. What we are trying to say, side government, is that individuals does not mean there's only one person that exists in this world. There's multiple people that contribute to the society. Now, moving on to my second rebuttal, the government say let us just focus on corporations, and then let us just handle them. You didn't say how you're going to handle them, but you're just kept on saying that we're just going to focus on this corporation, we're just going to ignore the individuals. So what about the individuals? Are you going to let them continue environmental their doings towards the environment? You're going to let them continue their doing open burning? You're going to let them uh, continue throwing rubbish? How are you going to encounter these people? How are you going to encounter the stakeholders here? Which are the people? Moving on to my third analysis, I'm going to give a comparative analysis on the world that opposition side has created and the world that government side created in the long term. So now let us look at the world that opposition side has created. Opposition side is creating a bright future where individuals are aware of their own responsibility thanks
Yeah,
to
I
their own
miss.
and no, thank you. I'll answer that if I have time later. what opposition side is trying to create is a brighter future where people are aware, just like what my first speaker said, when you have your responsibility, you are aware that you need to conduct your responsibility. But however, on side government, you're saying, let us just ignore the responsibility, let us just focus on the operations, let us create a degrading future where people on the younger people of the generation which contributing to the new generation, let us just be ignorant of them. Moving on to my fourth rebuttal, the first speaker said that IER is ineffective and it should not, ineffective meaning that it shouldn't be implemented. Then you continue to say that, the second speaker continued to say that IER is effective, but it shouldn't be in a narrative form. So what do you mean by this? Aren't you coming to a common goal on side opposition where we both want to ensure that individual environmental responsibility is implemented, but as side opposition, we want to be implemented it as a narrative. Okay, moving on to my fifth rebuttal, you said that even with this, even with multiple people, even with campaigns being implemented, that the younger generations do not understand um, what is the need of their individual environmental responsibility. Do you not know that uh, being environmentally friendly is now a trend or an aesthetic, especially on TikTok? You see a lot of people, or you see a lot of people on socials, they're promoting, they're using their awareness, their responsibility, they're using their responsibility and they're spreading awareness to other people on different media platforms. They're saying, okay, let us use this. They are playing their responsibility as an individual. So to say that they are not understanding to say that they are not understanding um, the their responsibility is wrong. And next, I'm gonna focus on this. Throughout the debate, you said, the second speaker mentioned of side government. They mentioned that corporation only focus on their profits. But where do their profits come from? Like what my second speaker said, consumerism is the main contribution to their profits. Let me give you an example. We say that Coca-Cola is the main contributor to plastic pollution. Now let us say that consumers, one person consumes about 92 Coke products a year, and let's say there's 1 billion people, or 1 billion people in the world, meaning that 92 billion people contribute to the plastic waste. Now let us say that everyone has their own individual environmental responsibility. Now let's say that half of these people understand their responsibility. Now we already reduce the amount of plastic by half, which is our main goal. We want to, the government side and the opposition side want to have the main goal, which is to provide a better environment. And finally, I would like to say that throughout the debate, side opposition continue to give you examples on how, continue to give you examples on how we gave you examples from different countries on how that people are the main reason why this environment is affected. However, you just gave your own analogy. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, third speaker. Opposition. Timekeeper, how much time are we giving them to prepare their reply speech? Timekeeper.
No time for preparation. They can start whenever they want.
All right, so we're starting with the government first. Opposition. So we start with the opposition first. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. You may start whenever you're ready, yeah?
As I mentioned in my first speech earlier, this debate isn't about whether or not individuals have value or whether or not major corporations have value in today's debate. We're saying that both have value. That's what we agree on both sides. Both have value. But the opposition side seems, our side believes that individuals value in contributing to environmental pollution, with however insignificant however insignificant it is, or however small it is, like the government size is, however small it is, we believe that it does have value. And what does value have? Value contributes to something. It contributes to a solution or a problem, and it has effects. These are the effects that we are focusing on today. As for the reply speech today, I will tell you a couple of things. I will give a recap on what my side has said for all three speakers, and I'll also link it to what the PM, DPM, and the GovWhip has said, that and basically prove why our arguments trump over their side, right? So in my speech, I talked about how about individual, what exactly is individual environmental responsibility, which the Prime Minister did not point out specifically. I also told about how the stance that we do believe individual responsibility is important, and holds value and does affect corporations. The government side seems to be thinking this narrative where that they believe that companies are profit oriented, and therefore individuals responsibility does not have an effect on them, and they use the term motivate. We're not trying to say that individuals motivate a company. We're saying that an individual's responsibility affect a company, right? We even give an example by my opposition whip, and my DLO also talked about consumerism power, which is directly linked to what their case has been saying for all three speakers, right? We gave you an example on how when an individual knows that a company unethically has produces their products, then because of individual responsibility, they would stop supporting that company, and therefore that company will not exist. And therefore it's really simple, really, that mindset. But apparently the government side is being ignorant to 90% of what we've been talking about today, right? So the PM did not address and stress about individual environmental responsibility on what exactly it is. And the DPM also talked about mainly talked about corporations being harmful, but still say that corporations are the main solution towards this problem, which in my speech I already catered towards that problem by saying that having companies as the main solution would promote performative activism, which the government side did not address at all. So and they also said that corporations are easier to control. How? They didn't tell us how are they going to control companies? How exactly are they going to control these profit-oriented people rather than individuals with a conscience, normal individuals in the society with a normal moral stance, right? We also talked about how individuals has value. Yeah, it's small, but individuals make up society. They make up a community. They make up people as whole, and that's why their value is big in today's debate. And they kept saying, that we should look at the bigger picture. Yeah, we are looking at the bigger picture. They're looking at the small picture because they're saying that individuals have small value, while we are looking at the big picture because we believe that, yeah, these individuals have small value. You multiply them, you get a big value. So we gave my DL also gave specific examples of how individual actions contribute to mass corporations, and why do mass corporations are directly linked to individuals, and why does individual responsibility directly affect major corporations. Hence why our arguments trump over their arguments of being mass corporation being the significant matter in today's debate, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so can we hear the reply speech from the government?
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Good afternoon, Abid, to all the members of the hall once again. So to wrap up this debate, I'm just going to focus on a comparison between both sides. I'm going to focus on the burden of proofs that we have been pushing and the burden of proofs that they need to, and the burden of proofs on our side that we need to prove as well. So let's just make a comparison between the burden of proofs. So what I will do in my speech is, number one, I will explain what were the burden of proofs, and number two, I will explain how they were handled and responded by the opposition side and the government side, and number three, I will give a proper explanation on how the government side actually caters to all of the problems in the status quo much better than the opposition side. So let's first start off with the burden of proofs that we've given. So the burden of proof on the government side is simple. We first need to explain how IER is ineffective, and number two, we have to explain how is it not feasible. And for the opposition side, it's also pretty much the same thing. They need to prove how IER is in fact effective enough to become its own narrative, and they also need to explain to the whole how is it feasible. So let's look at the responses from responses from the opposition side when we talked about how it's ineffective. First of all, when we said that it is ineffective for IER to become a solution to such a huge problem, what they give is just the benefits of IER. They never really linked it back to how is it actually effective. They only talked about and blatted about how is it beneficial. How is it beneficial? They only give a lot of examples of it. Let me just take down some of the examples. So they have been linking that if you change an individual, you can also change the big corporations and government. So first of all, when they said this, they are actually agreeing with us that big corporations and the government is actually the major issue in this debate and the major cause to environmental issues. Yet they still somehow try to link it back with individuals, which I feel like they fail to actually properly link it, because individuals and big corporations are two separate entities. You cannot really compare them as one. When you said that the individual can change, the mindset of one individual can change, it doesn't necessarily mean that the big corporations will also change. Because like what the government side has been repeating, is that the big corporations are profit-oriented. They don't care about the environmental issues compared to how much money they will get. Yes, you can change an individual because they don't have motivation to have any profitable things through their actions. However, the companies themselves have motivation for ruining the environment because they want to get the profit out of it. So that's why it's completely unfair to just link it between the two. So another example I give you is that they fail to prove how individuals' actions have a huger impact than the actions committed by the big corporations, like what the government side has spoken about. So I feel like this is a very important clash, because once you are unable to prove how the impacts from individual actions are bigger than the impacts of big corporations, then basically you have lost this clash. You have lost to prove how IER is actually effective. So another example, like how you say that rubbish accumulated by one single city is already enough to compare it with the waste released by one factory. Yes, you may argue that the trash from one city is much bigger, but yet, if you were to take more than one factory, then how does it happen? The quantitative amount of waste released by a lot of factories will definitely outweigh the amount of trash that was given by one city, heck, even one country. So that's why they still failed to prove how these individuals can have a huge impact. They never give proper analysis on how it has a huge impact. So moving on to the next burden of proof that they barely touch upon, which is the feasibility part. So I already talked to you in my speech how the feasibility of something is very important. When you're trying to solve a problem, obviously you want that plan to be effective, can have a huge impact, and then also you need to prove how is it feasible. They barely touched it and only talked about it in the reply speech, which is already too late. So I feel like once the opposition disregard this burden of proof, it really shows that their case is actually not as strong as they think it is, and therefore we show all of our burden of proof for both worst case scenario and best case scenarios. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.